This is Fearless Careerist with Dr. Catherine Robert. On this episode, Catherine speaks with Dr. Cindy Woody about job hunting with the 100-mile rule and adapting your career to prioritize life's changes.
And then there's agency thinking, which means there's some power inside of me to do something. That's always how I've been. Like, I feel like I'm not going to give up. There's power inside of me to do something. And so I had that sense of agency. I had that multiple pathway thinking.
Here's Catherine Robert.
In today's world of online job applications and algorithms selecting interviewees, it may shock you to learn that there are still places where a hug or an apple pie can get you in the door for a job interview. That place is East Texas, where Dr. Cindy Woody has served as an educator and leader throughout her distinguished career. She is currently an assistant professor in educational leadership at the University of Texas at Tyler, and she joins us here today on Fearless Careerist. Welcome, Cindy.
Good morning. How are you today? It's so good to be here, Dr. Robert.
Oh, thank you for being here. Now, I know that everyone is wanting to hear about that apple pie, but let's start at the beginning. You mentioned that you were first in your family to attend college. How did you select one?
Well, that was a challenge because, for first generation, there's no tradition. Like, it's not like our family all goes to the University of Texas or we all go to Ole Miss or, there's no tradition there to follow. And so I happened to be blessed enough to attend a high school that had a scholarship program for students like me. So we only had 240 graduates, but 40 of us received what at that time would have paid for a full ride academically at a state university. I love my family, and so I wasn't really ready to just fly the coop right away. But I went to community college. They had some music scholarships there, and even though I wasn't a music major, participating in band and choir was enough to pay for my community college education. So then I saved 3 years of my scholarship, and that $14,000 paid for 3 full years at Sam Houston State University. So I selected my college by doing my own research. I had performed well on my PSAT test. So in case the listeners don't know, that's the test that makes you considered a National Merit Scholar. And if you get on that National Merit list, then colleges actually recruit you. But nobody told me that. I didn't know that. And I remember when the mail started coming in, my mother and I were just so excited. We were baffled by it. And we would get the mail, and she's like, "Look, Cindy, look what came today." At some point in that sack, I kept them in paper grocery bags in my closet. I had brochures from Harvard and Yale and Columbia and Brown and all of these Ivy League universities that I'd never heard of. It was a real blessing. But in the end, I was very practical. I wanted to be a teacher, and I chose the one that I thought was the best in Texas at that time, and that was Sam Houston State University. So that's where I went, and I have no regrets of doing that. It was just right for me. It's a good experience.
What made you want to be a teacher? Like, how did you know that in high school?
Oh, it's kind of funny you said that. Originally, I wanted to be a pediatrician or maybe a nurse because at that time, my mom had gone to community college. She went to community college while I was at home and she got certified as a registered nurse. But I was very interested in medicine. And so I even volunteered at the hospital and did, the Candy Striper route. And I even knew at that age I wanted to have a family. Like, to me, having a family and being a good family member, a good wife, and a good mom was very important to me, and it still is. And so I got to thinking about the doctors, the nurses that I saw around me, and their jobs are very difficult. And a lot of times, especially the pediatricians, they were expected to give to their patients before they gave to their families. Their families often had to be put second, and I didn't want to be in that position when I had a family. I remember when I was probably about a junior, I took geometry. And we had this young coach that came in. He was very likable, friendly, young guy, first year teacher. He said, I want to be honest, I don't know anything about geometry. I didn't sign up for this. Y'all are stuck with me. Like, we're just going to have to make it through together. And of course, we were horrified. We'd never had a teacher tell us that before. And he says, I'm really here to coach basketball, and this isn't my strong subject, but, congratulations, I'm your teacher. And he figured out pretty quickly that there were 2 of us girls that were very patient and we were very kind. And he told us that we were going to be the teachers. And he gave us a teacher manual, and we all had a textbook, and we divided the class into 2 circles. And so I taught geometry that year to myself and to, I don't know, what do you have, probably 10 or 15 kids in half of a high school class. And it went really well. Like, I just was really excited about, like, I'm good at this. And they listened to me and they respected me. And so I was like, okay, teaching is something I hadn't thought about. So I graduated number one in my class in college. And so I had an opportunity to stay and be a graduate student. And one of my beloved professors told me, nobody wants to see an expert in the field who's never worked in the field. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wait, what? And she's like, well, you're wanting to get a degree in literacy. You want, a master's degree in education, but you've never worked in the field of education. So my advice to you is go get 3 years of experience and then come back, apply for the master's program. So I would have to say within 3 years, I was married. I had 2 kids. There was no master's degree. That was just absolutely not on the horizon.
But you were teaching, right? You were teaching
I was
and
teaching,
got married.
yes, I was teaching. I got married in college. My senior year, I got married.
Oh, wow.
And I had 3 kids, and eventually, within 4 years of each other. Uh-huh. And so, master's degree was gone. I didn't go back until I was nearly 40.
Wow. All right.
Yeah.
But what did you think of that first teaching job?
I loved my first teaching job. It was just heart and soul. It was in an impoverished area of my hometown. I didn't know it even existed. I felt like I had met my calling. I was determined at that point I was going to be a first grade teacher forever.
Oh, wow. But what made you leave Corsicana?
Well, my husband had an aspiration to be a police officer, and that was in the 90s. And so he wasn't able, there was a large group of people applying at that time. He applied to be a state trooper, but eventually he got into law enforcement. He had an opportunity to go to Waco, and he worked in McLennan County Sheriff Department. And so we needed to move. And so I had a really big opportunity to make some changes, but I didn't know what to do. I remember my mother-in-law told me there were a few districts she wanted me to apply, and she went and got the applications. And I had an ink, like a pen, I sat out in the car.
Right.
And I had those paper applications, and I filled them out with a pen in the car and ink. I went inside at that district. I went inside and sat in the lobby when I got called for an interview, and I memorized the faces on the wall because they had pictures of the administration, and the superintendent walked by. He was a wonderful man, Dr. Albers, and I recognized him, and I said, "Good morning, Dr. Albers." Of course, he didn't know why I knew his name or who I was, but he introduced himself, and he took me right back to meet some people when he found out that I wanted to teach there. And I still remember that when my name got pulled, the principal that ended up hiring me told me, he said, "We have so many applicants here, hundreds and hundreds of applicants here." And he said, "The central office gives me batches of 25. And
wow.
I look through those 25 and select if I want to interview any of them."
Right.
And he said, "So the fact that you've made it to this point is a really big deal." Well, I didn't know. And then when I got the job, I remember sitting in an oil change place, and this lady next to me said, "Where do you work?" And I was like, "I work for Midway ISD." And she said, "Oh my gosh, how did you get on there?" And I was like, "Well, I took a chance. I filled out the application. I happened to meet somebody in person, and the rest is history." And she's like, "You don't understand. It's very difficult to get on there." And I was like, "Well, sometimes it just makes a difference to know somebody's name."
Wow. Okay. So learn people's names. That's good advice.
Learn people's names. Do your homework.
So you stayed in Midway for 7 years. Were you in the same position the whole time?
I taught first and second grade at Midway. The principal moved me to second grade and added half of my class gifted and talented. So I had 22 students. So that was really exciting for me. I got a lot of new training. And in general, in that district, that's one of the highlights of working there was I really started to see myself as a professional. In the first district, there was no goal of training. There wasn't a professional development plan, but that was a big opportunity for me.
So you were raising a family at the same time as
Yes.
all this work, right? How did that blend? You had 3 children.
I have 3 children. I have 2 boys and a girl.
Husband with a busy schedule, right?
It was really busy. And I felt like, you kind of go through stages. You go through the daycare years where it's all about the babies and they're helpless and they need you so much. And, you have to kind of work all that in with your career. You have to work and live simultaneously. And then when they're a little older, you go through what I call the hauling years. We're just hauling everybody around to all their activities. But, along the way through those years, you make a lot of network connections that can help you in your career. You just don't understand that when you're young. You meet a lot of people. You become connected with a community. You begin to kind of settle into a pattern. And I think, my children were doing really well there, but I did feel this longing to stay home with them. I felt like they were no longer babies and that their childhood was passing by. And I had become really ingrained in the work at my school. Working a high-performing district puts a lot of internal pressure on a person like me because I'm a high achiever and I want to keep up. And I remember the principal coming down, Mr. Beeson. Mr. Beeson came down one day after work. It was like 5 o'clock in the evening. And he said, what are you doing?
For people who are not teachers get there at 6:37 a.m.
Oh, yeah.
And so
right.
to be there at 5, you've been there a really long day at that point.
Right. I was decorating my door. And Mr. Beeson said, Cindy, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm decorating my door for, like November. And he said, why are you doing that? And I was like, well, that's what we do here. And he said, who says that's what we do here? And I was like, well, Mr. Beeson, look across the hall. There's Pam's room and there's Mary's room and there's Kim's room. And they're so beautiful. Like their doors are beautiful and their hallways are beautiful and their classrooms are beautiful. I want my kids to have that experience. And he said, Cindy, tell me the difference between a brown door and a decorated door. And I was like, well, again, I'm just keeping up with everybody else. And he said, Cindy, what are your babies doing right now? And I said, well,
oof.
Yeah, oof is right. I was like, 2 of them are in daycare and 1 is with my mother-in-law. And he said, so why are you at school decorating the door when you could be at home with your family being a mom? I know that's important to you because you talk about that a lot. And I was like, well, I just don't want to let people down. He was like, just listen to me carefully. Choose what's important. Choose what's important. He kind of gave me some advice. Put some things up that would last longer. Like, don't change it once a month. And I was like, but everybody else does. He goes, but that's okay. Everybody else isn't raising 3 little children. And so he was right. It was great life advice. And I really had to step back and look at how poorly balanced I had become by that point. But I was falling into that trap that I wanted to avoid when I didn't become a pediatrician. I was putting other families first.
Right.
While my family was suffering. So that was tremendous advice for me. It was a good pivot for me.
Right. And then ultimately you decided to leave teaching.
Well, I did. And this is why it's kind of a hard story to tell, I guess, in a way. But, I still wanted that master's degree. So at this point, I would have been teaching around a dozen years. And I felt time was passing by and I knew I needed to be there for my family. And I was doing a good job for that. But I also wanted that advanced education. Education was so important to me. And so an opportunity came up at my school for a reading specialist. Right. So I applied for the job and nobody else applied. Everybody in the building was so excited because by then I was an expert at teaching children to read and I had a minor in reading. So at some point, one of my students' parents came to me who was also a coworker, very precious friend. And she said, I want to tell you that I'm going to apply for the reading teacher job because the principal asked me to. And I was like, oh, okay, that's fine. That's fine. And she said, I'm not really interested in that job. I don't really know that I'm qualified for that job. But, the principal and his kids and my kids play soccer together. And so, at the soccer field, he said he would really like to see more than one applicant for that job, and he wanted me to apply for it. And I was like, okay, understandable, not a problem. So we walk along, we do the interviews. I have to interview with my colleagues. There's an internal committee, which is always hard. Interview with the principal. So school lets out for the year, and I still haven't heard, who got that job. And finally, he calls me, and the principal says, Cindy, I want to talk to you about that reading teacher job. I was like, yes. And he says, well, we went another direction. We went with the other person. And I was like, really? And he goes, I hope you're okay with that. And I hope that doesn't change things. And I was like, well, I'm going to be honest. I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with that. And he goes, well, I don't want you to be upset. I was like, I'm terribly upset. Why wouldn't I be upset? And he says, well, I want you to understand the reason you didn't get it is because you're so good at your job. And I said, so you're telling me that a person who excels in their role is never going to be promoted in our school? What kind of message is that? And And so he says, but you're just irreplaceable in the classroom. And I was like, that's not okay. I'm not okay with that. That's the wrong message to send to anybody. Yeah, good luck, right?
Good luck replacing me then.
Stuck around another year, but I wasn't the same anymore. It was like something inside of me had died a little bit. It was like I had lost hope. I'm studying hope a lot, and I had lost hope. Yeah. And so I had this yearning at that time anyway to stay home with my children. And so I thought, maybe this is just the Lord's way of saying, pull back, focus on your priorities. Your children won't be here forever. And this is a special phase. So I resigned at the end of the year, and I really thought that I would never go back to teaching. And he cried when I resigned. He was devastated. He just couldn't understand why I would leave and how he was going to replace me. But, I have no regrets. I think it was a good turning point in my life.
But that break didn't last too long, did it?
No. I think when you have a calling and you have, gifts, I think you feel a yearning to use them regardless of hurt feelings. I had to learn that your feelings don't always tell the truth. And so I felt really happy to be home, and I cleaned my house, and I made a garden, and I made bread, and I did all of those things. And, I went to everything for my kids. It's like volunteer of the year, for the school. But in the end, I just felt this emptiness. Sometimes I would find myself crying for no reason. And so I finally went to see our pastor, and our pastor said, I wondered when you were going to come see me. And he goes, I've noticed that you're not yourself lately. You have something to tell me? And he goes, yeah, I think you're called to be a teacher. I think this was what you were meant to do. There's people right now who are missing out because you aren't teaching. And I said, what about my own children? And he said, it'll be okay. When you have a calling, God takes care of the whole plan. Like, there's a plan for your children. Your children will be fine. And he was right. I went back to work, but that was another opportunity for my husband to promote. And so we went back, and, it put me back into the school system where I had grown up, which was really interesting. Mm-hmm. And so I worked for a year. And then my husband said, could you maybe come back home one more year? And just because we still, we got really spoiled, have a new home, and the kids have had a lot of adjustments, moving to a new school and a new community. And, that was during 9/11. Things were everybody was sort of nesting, kind of like during the pandemic. It was hard to go back to work. And so I took another year off.
Right.
And that's where the pie comes in.
All right. The pie. Well, before we get to the pie, I want to be sure. You told me a story about 9/11 and where you were, and it sounded like that also had a big impact on your decision process in your career.
When 9/11 happened, my husband was on the road. My dad was on the road. And my mom and I were talking to each other, and we didn't know what was happening. I mean, those of you who were alive at that time, it was very confusing. You were watching the news, and, it's just starting to come in, and it seemed so much even bigger than it was. Like, it felt like the whole world, the globe was falling apart, at that time. Right. And I remember wondering about my children, and I watched them as they got off the bus, and I could tell that they didn't know about what had happened. They didn't know about the attacks on the towers or anything. They didn't know any of that. And they were twirling in the street. September is a beautiful time of the year. The light is golden, and the leaves are falling, and my neighborhood was so idyllic and still. And here are these beautiful children getting off the bus, playing and laughing and wearing their backpacks, and just so innocent and sweet. And I thought, what am I going to say to my children? What kind of place are we living in? And what will they need to be prepared to face? And so I really felt like I had this yearning to go be with a group of children and to walk those kids through that. And I didn't want to substitute teach. I wanted my own class. I wanted the family, because when I was a teacher, it was always a family in my classroom. When we closed the door, it was just us. And so I felt like that was the same. At home, I have my family, and it's just us. And they're looking at me to interpret this for them in a hopeful way. And so I did feel that call to go back. And I felt like, it would make a difference if I could.
So now I've lived in a rural community, and I was in one during the 9/11 also. I know it can be tough to find a place to live and to find a job. So how did you then go back to work? You're in a small town.
Well, it was tough because I had the back-to-back. I had a year off, then I worked, so I had to get that job in my new community. Then I had another year off, and then I had to get another job. Okay. So the first time when I came back to Corsicana, it wasn't too bad because at that time I'd already been named Teacher of the Year. I'd had some awards, and I had been successful. And I just happened to come at the right time when there was a first grade opening at a neighborhood school in Corsicana. And so I got that job. That went extremely well, but I think they were kind of shocked when I quit. Mm-hmm. I only came for a year, and so there was just confusion about why I would quit. So I put my application in, and I'm just thinking, I got a job before. Like, I got the first job, and then I got the second job, and I got the third job. And for the first time really since I had become a teacher, I couldn't get a break.
Oh.
And I talked to local people and there were openings and I couldn't understand, like, why are they not calling me? Like, why isn't anybody giving me an interview? And so, when I read about what hope is, part of what hope involves is seeing multiple pathways. Mm-hmm. And then there's agency thinking, which means there's some power inside of me to do something. That's always how I've been. Like, I feel like I'm not going to give up. There's power inside of me to do something. And so I had that sense of agency. I had that multiple pathway thinking, So what am I going to do? So I got up early one morning and I made 3 apple pies in glass dishes, beautiful blue glass dishes. I still remember. And let me tell you, I know how to make that kind of old-fashioned apple pie where you roll the dough out, with a rolling pin.
You're making
and
me hungry.
The apples, I know, and the cinnamon. And my mom taught me this little trick where you dot butter inside before you put the crust on top. Yeah. And then you put sugar on top and you bake it until it's flaky. They were so good. Yeah. So I took these 3 apple pies and I put them in my car and I drove all the way into Corsicana to the central office building that had the HR office in it. And now remember, this man didn't know me, didn't care to know me. So I went to the front desk. I had the pies. I could only carry 2 at a time. So I have 2 pies and they're just hot. They're steamy. They smell so good. And the receptionist said, "Hi, what are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm dropping these off in the break room." She's like, "Okay." So I go and I put them in the break room. I go back and I get another one. And by then people have gathered. "What is this?" And I was like, "I'm trying to get a job, but nobody will look at my application. So I brought you some apple pies. Be sure and tell the superintendent that there's apple pie out here and it's coffee time." That also gave me another reason to go back. By taking my dishes, I had to go back and pick them up, right? So I'm thinking to myself, well, if nothing, nothing else, then at least I've seen some old friends, because at that point, people are crawling out of their offices. You know what an apple pie does? It smells so good. Yeah. People are just showing up from everywhere fighting for these 3 apple pies. And, I bet it wasn't 2:00 in the afternoon before I had gotten a call about 2 openings I could choose from.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. So, you must make a really good pie.
Yeah. It's a good opportunity to be remembered.
So you dug back into teaching, challenging yourself, in this case, to work with students with high needs, right?
Yes, I would say it was exhausting. Just the physical energy that it took to keep so many things going at once. It's a lot.
So eventually you ended up teaching at all levels. You moved from elementary into middle and high schools. What made you pursue administrative work?
Well, I didn't intentionally go into administrative work. I was still rocking along with no master's degree. And I had been involved in a science collaborative through our regional service center that supports the schools in our area. And I loved it. And so the lady that was in charge of the grant called me and she said, "I just want to give you the heads up that we've posted a position at the service center for somebody to be an elementary science specialist, and maybe you want to apply for that." "Oh, yes. She said, "You do have a master's, right?" And I was like, "No."
Oops.
She said, "How do you not have a master's? I just assumed you had one." She's like, "Texas A&M Commerce has a partnership with their college.
Right.
So go see what they offer." And of course, the only thing they offered, you can guess, was an administrative degree.
Of course.
So I went into it thinking, I'm not going to be a principal. Who cares about that? I don't want to be a principal. I want to be a science specialist. So I want to get a degree in educational leadership.
Okay.
Right? But I fell in love with it.
Yeah.
And, along the way, the whole idea of networking, one of my professors always called me Professor Woody. And so he said, "You should be a professor. You're so good at this stuff." Professor Woody said, "Wish you would come work for me." And at that time, he worked in Waco. And I was like, "Well, no, that's too far of a commute. I'm not going to commute." And so he's like, "Yeah, okay, well, hit me up if you ever decide you want to, come work for me." So fast forward.
Okay.
Couldn't get a job in administration. And so I ended up working for him. I drove a little bit farther and worked for him in Tyler.
Okay. So you didn't get the first administrator job you applied for?
No. When I decided to get that degree in administration, I had to have a letter from my boss saying that he would support me, my principal. So At that time, I was working in middle school.
Right.
And he called me in, and one of my friends, we were going to do this together, and he said, "Ladies, I want to be honest with you." And he said, "You're not going to like what I have to say." He said, "Women in our community have a really hard time getting into leadership roles." He said, "That's not, I don't endorse that. I don't support that. That's why I'm telling you this. You're going to have to understand the reality of what you're facing. If you look at the principal pool versus the teacher pool, most teachers are females." But he said from that pool, very few make it to administration. Most teachers are not male, but most administrators are male. So the odds of a man getting into the role are much greater than the odds of a lady getting into the role. Mm-hmm. So he said, I want you to make me a promise. If you'd get this degree, you won't just sit there quietly hoping for somebody to give you a job.
Wow.
I was like, wow. And he said, I've seen so many women do it. And he said, a lot of women, like in your group, like, 30s, 40s, they've put their family and their lives on hold to get this degree. They've sacrificed. They've paid all this money. They've spent all this time and effort on their degree. Mm-hmm. And then they hope and they pray and they wish that they could get a break in their district. And it just doesn't happen.
So you didn't sit there and just wait?
No, he said, what I want you to do is I want you to put a pin in the map, get a real road map, put it on the wall at your house and get a pin and, measure out what 100 miles would look like on a string. And then you draw a big circle on the map. 100 miles from home. He said, Cindy, your first job is worth 100 miles. Wow. I was like, what does that even mean? And he's like, get in the car and drive up to 100 miles for a first good break. And he's like, once you have that first break, your reputation and your work will take care of your future. But it's like your first break isn't going to be given to you. You can't bake an apple pie.
Yeah, that was the same advice I got, but there were some of those directions were too dangerous to drive in the dark.
Yes.
Because, of course, you're going to be driving in the dark. And there was deer in rural Texas everywhere.
Yeah, I had to drive through the deer. I actually hit a deer, which was devastating, but yeah.
Oh, okay. But in the end, you said, okay, I'm going to go work for the person who offered me a job.
Well,
right?
I applied for all the jobs that were open in my county. So there's 8 school districts in my county. I applied for every administrative job. To me, that was like driving, maybe it's 30 minutes. Right. That's driving. And so I applied for everything open. It was crickets.
Right.
I heard nothing back.
Not even an interview.
There was nothing. And the openings that I looked at were filled by people typically internally.
Right.
Which is frustrating. It's kind of a conundrum. Like I couldn't get on in my own district, but there were only 3 schools in that district and none of the principals were retiring. I couldn't catch a break. So, yeah. So I did eventually emailed my old professor. Okay. And I was like, here's my resume. Do you see something in your job list that you think might be a good fit for me? I was tired of applying.
Yeah.
I didn't want to apply anymore. I just emailed him and asked him that question. And he wrote me back and he's like, I think you'd be great fit for advanced academics director. I want you to apply for that, which is not anything I would ever have applied for in a million years.
Right. Imposter syndrome, huh? He thought you couldn't do.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Even though you had done all the teaching, you had taught advanced academics.
Right.
Okay. Any early mistakes in your first administrator job or two?
Oh, yeah, tons of them. I think when you come from the classroom and you come from a small system into a big system, there were just basic things I didn't understand. Like I had never had a budget. So I had really only ever communicated with teachers, colleagues, parents, students, my principal. But I had never communicated outside my campus with other campuses or other district leaders. And so I remember I sent an email out to the elementary principals and there were, I think, 17 of them. And immediately my email box started going ding, 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 because I had made a mistake. And I was horrified. I remember going to my first campus. I want to go around, I'm going to meet my principals. And I walk up to the receptionist and, I'm wearing a suit, but, I don't really know what to expect. My goal is just literally to say, hello, my name is Cindy Woody, I'm in charge of advanced academics. Here's a face to go with a name. And so the receptionist looks up and she says, may I help you? And I tell her and she goes, oh my goodness, let me get the principal. Let me get him right now. I'm going to pull him out of this meeting. I'm like, no, I'm nobody. I'm nobody. But I didn't understand that when central office shows up, it's different. Like I didn't understand the power of the office and the weight of the role. I
know what you mean. Okay. But you mentioned that one of your principal jobs didn't even pay enough, to make a living. So was it worth it to have that experience?
Yeah, so I had to learn pretty quickly not to make my decisions based on money. As advanced academics director, I was principal of a magnet campus where we bussed gifted kids in and out every day,
right,
while I was also doing my other roles. But I had never been a real principal. I wanted to be a real principal.
Right.
So one day, the superintendent came up to me at the special needs prom, and I was crying. And she said, I think you're ready. I was like, ready for what? She said, I think you're ready to be a principal. And so I took this amazing campus.
Right.
And they were a high needs campus, like 99% low socioeconomic status, but just amazing things happening there. A great mission, a great purpose, a great community. And I loved that job.
Right.
And it paid really well. It was a time of prosperity. And by then we had moved into We were buying my parents' farm. Everything was good. But my husband's dad, his health began to decline. So my husband and I had this long conversation about what mattered to us in life. And he said, my dad really only wanted one thing for me in my life. He wanted to see me be an ag teacher like he was. He was an ag teacher, agricultural science. And he always wanted me to be an ag teacher. And I never really wanted to be one.
Right.
But he said, wouldn't it be great if I could give my dad that for Father's Day this year? I could take, my goal would be to get a teaching, like a job offer. I could take my contract to my dad on Father's Day, and then he would at least know before he dies that, his last dream for me came true.
Right.
And so I'm like, okay, all right. I've heard crazier things. So he passes the test, he gets the job, and he goes for the interview, and he says, my wife might want to work here. What do you have for my wife? And they said, well, we have a middle school principal job, so we'd really love to talk to her. So my husband says, come commute with me. We'll go to this town. I think it was 60 miles. I don't know. It took us over an hour to get there.
Oh, wow.
And he had to be there so early because as an ag teacher, you go so early and so late because you train teams early in the morning, late night. So I took the job and it paid $20,000 less than what I was making. And he took the job and it paid $15,000 less than he was making.
Wow.
But I also wanted desperately to have secondary experience.
Right.
Because I did kind of have an aspiration of being a superintendent. And I felt like I had been super pigeonholed as an elementary person. I think females get that way a lot. Elementary, maybe that's all you can do because you're so nurturing and you're so loving, but we don't really need that in secondary.
Yeah.
And so it gave me an opportunity to dip my feet in the pond of secondary leadership. I'd already been a high school teacher, but most of my career had been in elementary.
Okay.
And so, it was a great decision and immediately launched me into other things, but we could not sustain that one change.
Yeah.
Like we didn't care about the money, but we could not sustain it. Even though we tried really hard to live below our means, we couldn't afford to buy a house in that town and we couldn't afford to commute every day forever.
Right. Yeah. So you had to make a choice. So you ended up leaving, went back to a larger district as the executive director of teaching and learning. So this was
bigger. It was a huge career leap. Yeah. Okay. And I think really the reason that was possible was because of the career changes. Like people are so afraid to change.
Yeah.
My advice is just leap fearlessly. Don't be afraid to change. Change is good. Change is renewing. And if it doesn't go the way you think, then you can always change again.
So did you come up with the expression leap fearlessly? You had mentioned you had gotten a gift from someone about that.
Yes, I did not come up with that expression, but it has become important to me. So when I was an elementary principal, one day, maybe it was for my birthday, these two ladies came in who were in clerical positions. One was what we call the PEMS clerk, and the other was the school secretary, who's also my secretary. And they said, we bought you a present, and we want you to take it to heart because we've watched you. Like, we know how hard you work, and we know what you're trying to do, and we know how many barriers you hit in your work, and we know how much resistance you encounter, and you just never give up. And sometimes it's at your own personal cost, a lot of the time. And we see that. So we bought you this little dish, and it has a message on it for you. And the dish said, leap fearlessly. And one of the ladies, Miss Watson, said, Miss Cooksey and I want you to hang this above your door of your house, inside your house. And every day when you go out, we want you to look up at that message, and we want you to continue to leap fearlessly. Like, don't be afraid to do the hard thing. It's the important thing to do.
So you were an elementary principal then? That was before the job?
I was elementary then. So that was another thing. When you think about leaping fearlessly, sometimes you have to leap fearlessly for things other than your career.
Right.
The move to the smaller town was really for my father-in-law.
Right.
And it worked.
Yeah.
It worked. He bounced back. It really meant a lot to him. And he tried to eat again and walk again. And he lived several more years. We really felt like that commitment to him meant enough to extend his life.
Wow.
Like he regained hope. Yeah.
So it was worth it to make that sacrifice to leave that.
It was absolutely worth it.
Yeah.
No regrets. Absolutely worth it.
You had also, at the same time that you took the executive director of teaching and learning, you started pursuing higher education. Went back for your doctorate.
Yes. So I had gone to work in this role as executive director. And at this time, I was closer to the Dallas Metroplex. I was driving that direction. So it was always a drive for me. East Texas, South Texas, West Texas, North Texas. So I was working as executive director. I had already completed my master's degree. And I believe by then I had already completed my doctoral degree.
All right.
So I'd had that for several years. And so I guess about a year or two into that job, I got a call from a former professor who said, said, "Would you be interested in adjuncting?" I was like, well, that's awesome. So I applied. I was hired to be an adjunct. And then I really loved it. And I began to get really invested in what we were doing with our students because I felt like there was kind of a mess in some of the classes I was teaching.
Right. And this is kind of early online education. So that's part of what drove a lot of.
Right. And we had a part-time coordinator at that time at the university level. And he was, I guess he was near the end of his career. So they made the position full-time and I was able to apply and come in as a visiting professor.
Okay. So you quickly learned how low the salaries are in higher education. How did you like it otherwise when you were working as a program coordinator?
I loved it. Absolutely loved it. I loved it more when I was teaching more. You know, as I began to get better at the coordinating part, I moved more and more and more into administration. Mm-hmm. But I moved to coordinating multiple programs or directing. I moved into a director's role. I was directing multiple programs and then working more internally on the student experience side so that the students would have a better handoff throughout the system. I did a lot of customer service, but I was feeling increasingly disconnected from the people that I worked with and people I served.
Yeah. Now, you also created a YouTube channel that's been very helpful to Texas teachers wanting to become principals. We'll link that in the show notes. And that's helped not just the students at the one university, since it's open to all students, right?
So I love that little YouTube channel, even though the videos are terrible. But I have found that as a servant-hearted person, I know you can relate to this. The give back is so important to me. Mm-hmm. I love that is a free thing that people can take.
Right, right. You left after a couple years. How was it to go back to a school district after working at a university?
Eventually, my husband was like, how about this promise you made to yourself you wanted to be a superintendent? My husband put a big old nail in the wall, and he put a yellow pad on it, and he hung this clipboard on that nail. And every day he would peruse the job ads for me. And he had made this little pen and ink chart where he would write what superintendent jobs were open, how many miles they were from where we lived.
Wow.
What the deadline was, what they wanted, and what it paid. Okay. And I would always say, I would make an excuse. Well, that's too far from my parents. You know, we help take care of my parents.
Okay.
I had all these excuses.
Okay.
But eventually, he's finally got me pinned down one day, and he would say, you know, that's another district that could have benefited from the gifts you have that you've turned your back on. It's like, stop. I know, right? Stop. He knew how to get to me. Eventually, he said, what would it take? And I was like, well, I'm just so far out of touch. I would like to go back where I left off. I left off as executive director. I'm certainly not ready to go right back in after, this many years away from schools to be a superintendent. So he said, fair enough. So I came home the next day and he had put executive director jobs on there. Okay. So he was right. I applied for two of them. We drove down to look at them. Uh-huh. And the first one that called interviewed me. It went really fast. I got the job immediately. Wow. And boom, I was back in K-12.
There you go. And then you rang the bell a couple years later, getting the top job as a superintendent.
Yeah. So, he did the same thing to me on the superintendent. He's like, it's been a year. When are you going to be a superintendent?
Okay.
I was like, oh, stop it. And he said, there's some school somewhere that needs you. So I applied. I, went. It was a small school. I loved small schools. I went. They interviewed me that night. They said, go somewhere and wait, and we'll call you and let you know if you got the superintendent job or not. But just know there's not much cell service around here. So go somewhere with cell service. So
I have lived that life.
Drove 30 miles away, stopped in a Dairy Queen parking lot. They called and said, you got the job. Yes, you got the job.
Okay.
So it was thrilling. It was a wonderful, wonderful time in my life.
It was wonderful, but you didn't stay in it.
No, I didn't stay in it because, ultimately, you remember way back in the beginning, my original goal that exceeded all of my other goals was about my family.
Okay.
My dad's health declined tremendously during the 2 years I was superintendent. And so, I felt so guilty because my dad fell, my mom fell. I couldn't be there to take their trash out and to drive them to church. So this is for my family. I went back to higher education. I took a drastic pay cut.
Of course.
Just, in the end, the money doesn't seem to have made any difference. We still do the things that we want to do.
Right.
I think you adjust your standard of living when your salary goes up and down. And I have zero regret. I help my parents all the time.
Okay. What does your work day look like now?
Well, it varies from day to day. I do a balance of teaching and research. It's my first time to be able to be a researcher, so I'm very excited about that.
Yeah.
So some days I go into the office, some days I work from home.
That schedule is compared to your superintendent schedule, where you were undoubtedly working at least 12 hours a day, always returning emails. Right.
Yeah, even during the night, law enforcement calls or, emergencies happen.
Okay, you're still years away from your career endpoint, but what do you see as your legacy?
Well, I feel like my legacy is really in other people, if that makes sense. Like, it's not so much about my career, because as you can see, I've moved a lot. I try to breathe life into others. I think that my legacy is developing other people and inspiring them.
Yeah. Well, I know when you and I worked together, I felt inspired by your hard work, your pragmatism, right, with solving problems, and it was.
You're so kind.
It was a lot of fun. Your story demonstrates a purposeful mixing of family and career decisions. You choose jobs based on the combination of your right now needs and future goals.
I would say at the beginning, it's so important to figure out what you believe. Like what you care about. Doesn't mean that my values should be everybody's values, but those are what mine are. And I was very clear early on those. And I think having those to go back to, I look back at my goals and my priorities. I look at all the different ways to get to the goals. And I look at what power I have within myself to do that and what power I don't have. There's some things you just don't have. Like the man saying, women don't promote as fast. Well, I'm a woman. That's what I am. And so that I have to set that aside if that's a barrier and choose to focus on what I can do. I can do a lot of things.
Dr. Cindy Woody, it has been a true pleasure having you as my guest. Thank you for sharing today.
Thank you for having me.
To learn more about Cindy's research and guidance for leadership preparation, see the links in our show notes. I'm so excited you're here. And remember, you're not alone on your career journey. Together, we can share our stories, move boldly into that perfect job, and we can light the path for our future fearless careerists. I'm Catherine Robert, and I can't wait to hear your story.
Fearless Careerist is available on Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube. Subscribe there or visit us at CatherineRobertEDD.com.